we did a whole episode on panpsychism. It was the first time I was introduced to the idea, and I'm indebted to you because it's now become one of my favorite ideas in philosophy. I think it's
You're getting into
so
it,
plausible, it's not even funny.
I didn't see that coming, I must say. But yeah, it's...
Well, I feel similarly, I suppose, to you in that if myself from, say, 10 years ago wouldn't have been saying too much because I was, a teenager, but could have heard me now talking about consciousness as fundamental, at least without getting into too much detail, I would have thought that I'd lost my mind, if you will.
Right.
And in a way, I feel like I kind of have, and I've submitted it to the foundational consciousness of everything that the universe is made out of. But I kind of know what you mean. You sort of, after some time, you sort of have to think, okay, something's definitely going on here. And what I'm interested in is the details here, right? Because you say that you're confronted with fine-tuning, which... Oh, and I should say, the reason I brought that up is because if you don't know what panpsychism is, it's the view that the universe is made up fundamentally of conscious material, or that matter itself is consciousness or has conscious properties. And if you're interested, we had that whole episode which people can go and listen to, or just, Wikipedia it. I don't want to waste too much time going over that again, but just so people know what that is. And it seems like you can sort of shelf that, and then you've got this problem of fine-tuning, which is the issue of the constants of the universe. Things like the strength of gravity, the strength of the strong and weak nuclear forces that hold the universe together. In principle, there seems to be no reason why these constants couldn't have been different. These forces could have been stronger or weaker. And if gravity had been stronger by even an unfathomably minute proportion, the whole universe would collapse in on itself. And if it were any weaker, then the universe would fly apart at the Big Bang and atoms wouldn't be able to form. And so everything is very, very finely balanced. And so confronted with this, many people say that the only options are that it's chance, which seems completely ludicrous. It's just so unlikely. Or that there's a multiverse, which is one version of chance. It's really, really unlikely, but there are so many different iterations that one of them is going to be this universe. And the third is to say it was designed that way.
Yeah.
That's the classical response to the fine-tuning. It sounds like, the way you just presented it then wasn't like that. It wasn't like you were confronted with these and you went with design and now you're a theist. So it seems like something else is going on. So in the face of fine-tuning, you're a panpsychist, you think the universe is made out of consciousness, you're not a theist yet. What is the response to fine-tuning that makes you now say that you're maybe a bit religious?
Yeah, I think panpsychism offers us a really nice solution to the fine-tuning problem. So I guess the people on the theistic side of things usually postulate a supernatural designer who's fixed the numbers to make sure we can get life. But if you're a panpsychist and you think the universe is conscious, which is one prominent form of panpsychism that I've defended among other forms, often known as Cosmopsychism, that the universe itself is the fundamental conscious thing. So if you're starting there, then that opens up the possibility that maybe the universe has goals of its own. And maybe we don't need a supernatural designer outside of the universe. Maybe the universe fine-tuned itself. So I think this offers a quite nice, elegant solution. We don't need loads of other universes. We don't need something supernatural and very different. We just need the universe itself, designing itself.
Now, you had a debate with William Lane Craig not that long ago. It's quite extraordinary. I think you really sort of go to blows a bit in that. It's really interesting to watch. And one of the things that he pointed out that didn't get a lot of airtime was that he thought there was a circularity here, because the fine-tuning is needed to explain the existence of the universe. The idea is that without these constants being tuned as they are, the universe just kind of couldn't form. You wouldn't have atoms, you wouldn't have matter, you wouldn't have anything going on, at least in a way that makes sense to us in this universe. And so to say that the universe itself is some kind of conscious agent, William Lane Craig wants to say, well, in order to get that conscious agent, there had to have been finely tuned constants to bring about this conscious agent. So it can't have been that conscious agent that did the tuning. What do you say to that?
Yeah, well, here I kind of cheekily borrow from multiverse theorists. And so they tend to postulate slightly speculatively, but rooted in kind of string theory and I mean, the fact that our current models kind of collapse in the so-called Planck epoch, the first split second of the universe. They speculate that in the very early universe there was some sort of flexibility. The constants weren't set in stone, and there's some kind of random processes fixing what the constants end up at. And then they think there's so many universes connected to eternal inflation. They think there's so many universes with each getting their constants fixed kind of randomly at the start that, one of them's going to fluke the right numbers for life. If enough people are playing the lottery, someone's going to win. So basically, I can take that picture that there's a very early period in our universe where there's some flexibility, where the constants are not determined, but rather than being determined by random processes, they are determined by the universe itself. And that way we don't need other universes. And if you're already in the ballpark of being, a panpsychist, and if it's not like an extra speculation, then it seems like a saving to not have to postulate loads of other universes.
I suppose it will feel like a lot to swallow if you're just sort of your average Joe, a physicalist, materialist guy. If you're not already a bit on board with panpsychism, as you were.
Yeah.
And you can sort of imagine saying, hey guys, like, I've got this argument that God exists. Okay, first you have to accept that the universe is conscious and made out of conscious. It's like, well, okay, stop there. So in telling your story, it makes perfect sense to say, well, look, if the universe is conscious, we have this lovely solution. I just want our listeners to be aware that we're not trying to say here, like, this conversation we're having now should convince you of God's existence.
Sure.
But rather, this is how you and your philosophy will slot into something like theism. But okay, so universe being conscious, and as I say, reasons why you think that are all over the internet and people can find them in your writings. You've got this sort of universe that's conscious in this early period of the universe. The questions that jump out to me are, firstly, there still will remain this question of like where that came from. Like what got that off the ground? I mean, even if everything's made out of consciousness, you might still have this sort of causal argument that says that there are these causal relations between material object, and even if it's made out of consciousness, it still abides by causal laws, and you want to explain sort of how that got going. And secondly, like how you characterize this very early state of the universe, this sort of, very chaotic state. Have you got a bunch of individual sort of fundamental units that all have a particular kind of rudimentary will, that all like will towards the production of the universe? Or are they kind of randomly bumping into each other until they form a kind of conscious whole? Or is it already a conscious whole? Where does it come from, and what is the nature of the thing that first exists?
Excellent. Two very good questions. So on the first point, I mean, look, there's two very different arguments for God, or that are traditionally put in support of God. One is this fine-tuning stuff. How do you get the right numbers for life? Another is what we call the cosmological argument. Where does the universe come from in the first place? Why is there something rather than nothing? So suppose, I mean, if you were just convinced by the fine-tuning stuff, and you just didn't buy the cosmological argument, you're happy to go with Bertrand Russell and say it just is brute fact, that's all there is. Well, then you can just say, well, the universe just exists. It's just brute fact. It came into existence, and then it fine-tuned itself. So you've got an answer to the fine-tuning, but you don't care about the cosmological argument. However, suppose you're convinced by both, and I got into this a little bit with Craig. Yeah, my debate with Craig was interesting. Usually with debates, I like to kind of make it more of a discussion. I see what you're saying. I see, I can see there's some truth to. But then I was talking to someone about this and saying, Craig's not going to do that. Craig's going to prepare to destroy you. So I responded in kind. But I think it was a friendly, spirited debate.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't
nasty, that's fine.
As you say, spirited. You were sort of getting into it, and there were points where you're sort of saying, look, you just said something it's just wrong. It's just false, and Craig's like, you're just digging yourself into a hole. But I do think it had a sort of friendly vibe.
He was telling me, I'd got Dale Allison, the biblical scholar, wrong.
Yeah.
And I happen to have a quote from his book available to me,
Yeah.
which I was quite proud.
I remember because you were like, well, I've got a quote from Dale Allison, and he was like, well, I just emailed Dale Allison, and then you would say, well, I just went for coffee with it. Well, Dale Allison's my dad, and it seemed like it could just sort of keep going on forever.
Yeah, Dale Allison, he's been very formative in my turn to heretical Christianity, actually, and his views on the resurrection have led me to a sort of non-standard view of the resurrection. Anyway,
yeah. Well, we'll talk about that.
Let's not drift off topic. But so suppose you are convinced that there has to be, let's say you think there has to be a necessary being, because otherwise there's no explanation of where it all came from. There has to be something that had to exist that created everything else. Well, in that case, and this is what I explore actually in my academic version of this, I've got an academic paper, Did the Universe Design Itself? And you could just say, well, the universe is a necessary being. And it didn't always... So then you might think, well, doesn't that mean it's eternal? Or you could say its temporal form is just one stage of the universe's existence. So the universe, if it's a necessary being... maybe before the Big Bang or before the start of time, it existed in a timeless form, and it then became a time-bound physical entity. And then if your Christian's going to say, well, that doesn't make sense. How can something necessary become physical? I'm going to say, have you heard of Jesus?
Yeah. And interestingly, William Lane Craig has this view of God, not just in the form of Jesus, but Craig himself thinks that God was timeless, and then upon creating the universe, entered into time, which a lot of people look on with suspicion, but it's not like, this isn't a view that's unique to what you're saying here. But it does sound like, fair enough, but haven't we just got a terminological dispute here? Because what you're postulating is a necessarily existing conscious agent which gives rise to all physical matter and human beings and, human consciousness and all of that kind of stuff. Isn't that just the same thing as what the traditional Christian says? And if it's not, what is your view here? Is it a kind of like pantheism? Pantheism is usually described as the view that God just is nature or the universe, and it kind of sounds like maybe that's what you're describing, but I don't know how comfortable you are with that label.
Yeah, I mean, you can think of this as a form of pantheism. So, I mean, I think that there are two attractions to it. One is parsimony. It's a more parsimonious conception of the divine because it's not something outside of the universe. You might think it's extravagant already to think the universe is conscious, but if you get into the panpsychism literature, I think it's actually, pretty motivated, but that's another discussion.
Parsimonious meaning sort of simple or elegant or like lacking too many seemingly unnecessary complications.
Exactly. Respecting Occam's razor. So that's one attraction, but I think the more important thing that's motivating me is the problem of evil and suffering. So as I'm thinking of this conscious universe, it's not an all-powerful being. I mean, it's an interesting question, how do the laws of physics fit in here, right? If you're thinking, okay, there's this conscious being with goals that is the universe, or what about the laws of physics that scientists seem to be telling us about? As I've developed this book, how we think of the laws of physics, what they're doing is recording the limitations, the constraints of the universe. And when I say constraint, it's not that I'm not thinking that there's something outside of the universe that's constraining it. It's just a fundamental fact that the conscious universe can do some things, can't do others, and physics is my philosophical interpretation of the laws of physics is it's capturing the limitations of the universe.
Wow.
And actually, what I like about this theory is I think you can give those limitations very simply, right? You just take physics, take out the values of the constants. That will give you a certain mathematical structure. And then the thought is the universe is able and is only able to create a universe with that structure, but can fiddle with the constants. So that's simpler than physics, right? So that's pretty damn simple. And I mean, you can capture it more precisely with a little logical tool called a Ramsey sentence, named after Frank Ramsey, who was, I don't you know Frank Ramsey, Alex, who was died at the age of 26 after making fundamental contributions to philosophy, economics, mathematics, and then died at the age of 26. Very, very impressive. Anyway, but we maybe won't go into those sort of fiddly details. But yeah, so it's a very nice, simple, precise hypothesis, deals with the fine-tuning, deals with the suffering. What's not to like?
Would you call it pantheism?
I'm happy with that.
In a way, like, who cares?
You
probably spend a lot of time at the moment.
I hate terminological disputes. They sort of, I use that word. I suppose when I was first talking about this, I wasn't using that language for kind of PR reasons, maybe to try and, persuade my secular colleagues that there's something worth thinking about here. But I'm kind of a bit of a religious person these days, so I'm happy with that.
Why not own it? I think this is really interesting, right? The view that I would describe as a kind of pantheism. The universe kind of is what you might call God, but the universe is this sort of conscious, possibly necessary. I want to say possibly necessary, but that means it's necessary. So, a necessary existing being who's conscious, who gives rise to everything, but is the same thing as the universe. And like you say, the laws of physics are a record of the limitations that just exist.
Yeah.
When you figure out that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, that's not because of some decision that was made. That's just a limitation of the universe that we are just sort of noticing, observing, right?
Yeah.
But the question that's going to arise is why? Why that limitation? I mean, the speed of light is what, 300 million something, meters per second. Why not 400? Why not 200? Why there? Why precisely? It doesn't seem logically necessary. And you seem to sort of get this, maybe not a fine-tuning argument back, but something a bit like it, of like, why is the universe limited in this way, but not limited in another way?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say you can never get rid of all the why questions. So even the traditional theists are left with, why is there an all-knowing, all-powerful, perfectly good being? Why does God exist? I guess if you buy the ontological argument, you don't have, but I don't think that argument works. So I think that even the traditional theist has to just say, well, that's a why question I can't answer. That's just, at least relative to human understanding, is just a brute fact.